Up until this period, there have been so many fascinating events. The show in Venice, the show in L'Aquila. One's career can, at a certain point, be filled with so many distractions. And of course, we love them. Anything is easier than being in the studio. The terrific walk drawings, Ishmael, that created themselves first with you in Venice, and then we followed up, of course, at the British Museum, at Somerset House, in my studio, at the Saatchi. These walk drawings, I felt wonderfully liberated. I could get out of the studio and I could spread my wings and feel my feet in the space, and I loved it. Well, now I had to stand at my table and draw again. I am on my own in New York. You know, it's a large flat. My studio is there. People were already somehow keeping to themselves a bit. I could structure my time as I wished. So I read a great deal, and I wrote and I drew. And I read and wrote and drew. And just before things closed down, I thought I would go to MoMA, the Museum of Modern Art. There was a show that was to open on a French, very kind of unique character called Félix Fénéon. And I really had a sense of him more than a knowledge of him. And I wanted to follow my nose there. So I went, and the museum was practically empty, which was just an extraordinary opportunity because the rehang is really quite spectacular, and it has been so crowded with people that here I was practically on my own. Well, I learned that the Fénéon show was not to open yet, but I did know that the Donald Judd show was open on the 6th floor. This is not an artist that I like at all. I would never have gone to see it. I would almost run a mile. But I thought, I'm here, let me just go up to the 6th floor. And there were 3 rooms only, this major, major artist. And it's the first retrospective in a long time. It's really 3 rooms. And I walked into the first room, and my heart just sank with the straight lines and the rigidity and the closing in on the thinking. And then I sped out. I mean, I was going at a pace. Could hardly wait to get home to make circles. And I very specifically had in mind the work of Eva Hesse that I very much admire. She was of that period, never really a minimalist like her great friends, Sol LeWitt. She used her body, but it's not embodiment like mine. It was still quite conceptual. So she did circles in the grid. And I had already, at this point, made 5 silver points with my characteristic straight lines, lozenges, fine, not fabulous, but fine. Well, I got home and I made this first very beautiful circular form. And it really, of all the works that followed, which look circular, it's the only one when I actually drew circles. So I knew right away, this isn't me. This really is a big, big, big nod to Eva Hesse. But if I'm going to nod to anyone, she's the one. And I looked at it. I mean, now I love the drawing. Then I didn't. But it started me, it freed up the movements. You know, fundamentally, that's really what happened during this period. My body began to move again in ways which give rise to the circles by virtue of the way I count through the sheet, turn the sheet 90 degrees anti-clockwise, so that whether the lines, whether the movements are half circle, half circle, half circle, or a curve, which was quite thrilling because it's just kind of a very archaic movement, or in this drawing, which I call good conduct, it's the movement of a conductor. All those movements are very consistent. You have to know exactly where you are on the sheet, but they will knit together. I think that really is a good word. They will knit together and form what one experiences as circles. Certainly didn't expect a pandemic to hit. But when it did, the very first thing that came to mind and into the minds of my sisters was the polio epidemic of 1951, which was so formative in our lives and really determined, for me certainly, the path that I follow today. So everyone was crazed and concerned, and I sat down to work. I had in mind my father, who in 1951 was completely paralyzed by the polio epidemic, hospitalized in an iron lung for 2 years, and he sustained himself knowing that his brain was unaffected. Probably he would never walk again, but he determined to live. And he could never walk or stand, but I can. So I have felt for a long time that my work is, in a sense, redeems his illness. One doesn't think about that very often, but there it was. And as I say, it was a big exchange with my sisters too, their memories. I was 4 years old when my father was stricken. The polio vaccine had not been created yet. That did not come till over 2 years later. So the country was in a state of panic, and certain friends, neighbors wouldn't give my sister and myself a ride home, for example, afraid of contagion. It was just a terrible, terrible fear. I remember exactly the night when my father fell. I didn't see him, but one hears stories. So it's a question now of clarifying in my own mind, what did I see and what am I remembering from stories? But that evening he fell, the doctor was called, it's my uncle, and I remember perfectly peeking through the keyhole of the bedroom when my uncle took the hammer to test his reflexes, and there weren't any. And he said, it's polio. And I remember the ambulance, very kind of turquoise blue, and I remember that ambulance pulling away. And again, the story is, and just to relate the pandemic to the epidemic, 3 or 4 hospitals would not admit my father because he was so contagious, and they were not prepared for this. Ultimately, he went to the University of Minnesota. Crucially, for him and for my life, he had an IQ test right away. His brain was a genius, IQ was fine, and he determined to live. Although the great neurologist, A. Baker, said, I have never seen anyone so compromised with polio before. He will not live more than 2-3 years, and he lived for 16 years by virtue of will and courage. Now, it's very much worth mentioning that he had fought in World War II when he was called upon then to rise to the occasion. The tank in front of his was blown to bits. He was leading an Iron Tank Division. He became captain on the spot and received a Silver Star. It's the kind of courage and service. He was a man committed to serve his fellow man. It was how he was raised. That would have been the milieu. And I bring that in now because I know that as a young man he considered being either a surgeon or to prepare for the law. He could have stepped into his father's grain trading business, but business was not for Roger Joseph. So he wanted to serve his fellow man. Had he chosen to be a surgeon, and I suppose I get my manual dexterity from him. He seemed very, very attuned to what I was doing and very supportive of that, always with a sweet smile on his face. But he chose the law, and that was, of course, great good fortune, because coming out of hospital 2 years later, completely paralyzed from the neck down, he went to his office every day in a wheelchair with a male aide We had an aide, and he worked in that wheelchair, and to see him, you know, with his files in front of him, he held himself proud. All he could move was an index finger, which was fitted with a pen, with a little, so he could sign his documents. You've known me for many years, Ishmael, and you know that I hope you'll agree I am the embodiment of humility. That's why the work is the way it is. I don't make it, it comes through me. So on this period, it's coming through me again without the usual noise. I am on my own, kind of round the clock in that first couple of weeks. My younger New York granddaughter then had her birthday. I went out to Brooklyn, and 16th of March is her birthday, was the last day restaurants were open. We had dinner, I stayed with them a few days, and they dropped me back to my Manhattan apartment, and off they went to the Connecticut house. And I was, just quiet. By then, New York is locked down. New York is already in lockdown, and I thought, great. I mean, it was so welcome to not have all the distraction that is life. And looking back, I really fight against it. But one is drawn in, and there's life. As you'll know too, I have just now brought together my late husband's estate and the sale of artworks and a major bequest, which have absorbed me in unprecedented ways, but in ways that I managed extremely well, really well. So I am strengthened by how successful that has all been. So that's just about behind me, but it has been an enormous call upon my time and my energies. So that in truth, I really have not made significant body of work for years because I have not had the quiet time to concentrate. This is what this period has been for me. Allison, my studio manager, whom you know well, came to archive the whole lot just at the last moment. I mean, she really had been out of New York all that period. I hadn't seen her at all, but she went that extra many miles to come and be with me. I think there are 80-some drawings. There are 32 silver points. There's a series of 8 drawings, small drawings with carbon paper. And there's a chronology, of course, and crucially, one can see what I learn along the way. When you do it with this kind of clarity, with this concentration, and then you see them up on the wall. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. As you know, they're dated. Chronology matters. Because that's how the work goes forward. So it's not only the unbroken concentration required in each drawing, but then holding on to that, reading it, assessing what it means, what it is, and how does one do the next. So it really is this knowledge, building up of knowledge. As I had time to draw, I had time to write significant jottings. The jottings could be developed. They too require time and thought and care. And I certainly aspire that they reflect the kind of clarity of my thinking, which one sees in the drawing, it would be a nonsense if they were different in kind. So they also must have order and fluidity and grace and light, turn and turn about. It has been very significant that during this period I am working with Silverman van Coenegrachts, who feels that this work I'm doing has real significance. And I think she saw in the way I proceeded, in the way I began to jot, something different in kind than she had already spotted in the work. And she is not wrong. This was different in kind. This was a restart. This was like turning on a button. And I was able to concentrate and focus with unequivocal commitment and determination, as I have not done maybe since I made my commitment to the studio in 1983. It was more her encouragement and enthusiasm which quickened it, I would say, more than the circumstances around me. It is invaluable during such a period to have someone watching, not pushing, not impinging, but watching and really echoing back what's going on, seeing it for what it is. Talking about the drawings, I feel we've kind of talked around them, but there was such a sense of freedom of movement. It was thrilling, that it was fun or enjoyable as opposed to a strain. So crucially, we have the circular forms, we have a lot of freedom of movement. You know, no one's looking over, I mean, Jill is watching, but she's encouraging the great sense of play. And then, crucially, when the lozenges and kind of diagonals set in again, they were called for by virtue of a kind of gesture in making the circle, which was a diagonal gesture. Well, okay, then I have to do that. But there was a difference. I wasn't forcing that diagonal. It wasn't a strain. In fact, I realized that if I just quite simply posed myself at a corner and lifted from the center, gravity would see me through. And so it was a different mindset than with the straight line. I let gravity take me through. I mean, I've done it before, but this somehow felt different. This just really felt, the lines were wobbly, but they would end in the right spot.
What intrigues me is how you dealt with this rather exotic, if you like, channeling. You're looking at works you hadn't done before.
No, well, this is what you hope for. I mean, it was if they were dispatches to you, they're kind of dispatches to me too. And interestingly, my older son Roger, who's a filmmaker, I asked him when something of note occurred, I would ask him to come into the studio and document it from a distance. And you know that he made the dispatches. And they sat in groups, and that's what gave Jill the excitement, you know, the information. Now, I think it's worth mentioning, Ishmael, I mentioned the sense of freedom and movement. The walk drawings surely had an enormous influence. And that's 2018, when you came to Venice. I said, this room wants to be walked out. There was a sense of freedom. So I think that first sense emerges there. I'm in space, drawing 1, 2, 3, 4 at the Saatchi. The tap shoes, the sound of those tap shoes was like being home. I mean, there it was sounded. Everything that triggers the work is now sounded out. You can't miss it. And when we say, we use the expression, you can't miss a beat. You can't miss a beat because you'll hear it, but then I wouldn't miss a beat because it's coming from the inside. And there's no mistake there. There's absolutely no mistake because I am so attuned to my body. This extended body now of drawings that is the topic of our conversation here, kicked off in New York. The huge proportion of the American work was created in the Connecticut studio. There was a continuity there, quiet. It's a studio where I have a long history. And my life is really quite settled. My family was around me. My older son Roger was there with the girls and his wife, and we had a good lockdown together. But the girls were remote schooling, and I had an active part in my younger granddaughter's school day, but I always make time for the studio. So I think one of the reasons I've been able to get on in my life is that my boundaries are very clear. And there's a studio door, and nobody comes in that studio. Harper did to do her homework, but that was important, and that was fine. She had her position, and I loved that. So that was, a very special, quiet period, enormous concentration. Coming back here, I thrilled to the shift. I got here, again, the first phase of lockdown was just opening, and my younger son is here with his partner and a brand new granddaughter. So I divided my time differently. It wasn't that, here the studio is quite far from where I live and far from Finsbury Park when they live. So I would have 4 very concentrated days of working here. Friday I would begin to pivot towards family responsibility out to Finsbury Park. This exceptional period of isolation and extended time and extended quiet when one was not distracted by the ordinary interaction of social life, one can think. And I had time then to sit down and put into words what I was thinking, what I was remembering from my childhood, how it felt during a time of enormous panic. April the 1st, 2020, Connecticut. Human conduct matters. And I quote, "All that is good in life, love, art, nature, and domestic puns, is play." Vladimir Nabokov, 1925. With social distancing the name of the game, with all non-essential businesses closed, where do we stand with art? How must we conduct our lives? Upright and alert, human conduct matters. Now more than ever, art seems essential, as does love, walking in the park, and domestic jokes. But this period is not a laughing matter. Family dynamics have never been more strained. What solace, then, to step inside the studio, where my body finds its natural reach. I mark my measure as I enact time itself. Poise and grace are all. And breath. What an irony, then, that my art is made of the very breath at risk to millions of lives worldwide. This is familial territory. In 1951, my young father, Roger Joseph, was stricken with polio during the deadly epidemic that year. Confined to an iron lung, he returned home after 2 years in hospital. Breathing for him was not involuntary. During sleep, he was aided by a rocking bed. He conducted his law practice from a wheelchair, upright and alert in mind, reminding himself to breathe. I've often thought that the sound of my graphite pencil moving through paper, marking my breath, was very like a breathing machine. This I noted in my jotting dated 27 August 2004. That thought haunts me now. I breathe easily because I can. I remain upright and alert because I am able. I am 2 feet walking because I must.